I could probably guess the initial reason why you clicked on my video. Whatever your status as a viewer and listener might be, whether you're a long-term sub, somebody completely new, somebody who occasionally checks out my videos, whatever that status might be, I can probably guess that one of the reasons why you clicked on this video is because I use an extremely clickbaity image, an image of a pretty hot, well-proportioned anime figure that is undeniably better looking than the vast majority of women in the real world. And if you clicked on this video for that reason initially, there's no shame in that, because I probably would have done the same. What I've done effectively is tap into your hindbrain. You're just reacting to something because of the visual cues. I probably wouldn't be that different. And that's undeniably a type of thirst, I guess, if you're a heterosexual male. And perhaps even homosexual men and straight women might click on the image because it's aesthetically pleasing. After all, there's a certain level of attraction to the aesthetic, to things that are well-formed and well-shaped. But again, this is something short-lived. It's a short-lived reaction based off of your hindbrain, based off of the urges that you're born with and that we evolve with as a species. And you might want to call that short-term thirst, for lack of a better phrase. That's up to you. But I mention this because I want to make that distinction between something that most of us would do as heterosexual males, or even as people, whatever our sexual orientation might be, and prolonged, exacerbated thirsting. And I have to say, I don't think there's been a point in time in the life of the internet, perhaps even humanity, where you see so much open thirst, prolonged thirst, long-term thirst on display. Men lusting after the most mild imagery they could possibly find. I'm talking about real-life images of women making YouTube videos, of Twitch thottery and what have you. And, of course, the devil's in the details. Some of this is so extreme that you have men donating thousands of dollars to Twitch thoughts who simply sit there in front of a camera and twiddle their thumbs. They don't even go through the motions of playing the games that they pretend to play. And I've talked about this before. A lot of that has to do with that very simple base desire for validation that is acquired through the female. And it's a really easy thing, if you happen to have the money, to drop a bunch of money on a screen to a female that doesn't give a shit about you, mind you, and for her to call you her boyfriend for the hour or the day or whatever the exact term might be. It's really simple. You don't have to make any effort, and it's done with quickly. I actually don't blame the men who do this. We have to bear in mind that it's oftentimes the people who are most combative and argumentative about not being animals, about not being subject to the whims and instincts of their animal nature, that are most susceptible to that animal nature and most in denial of it. And I'm not saying these men fall in that category, but many of them do, as do women. Women have their own urges and instincts, and I would argue that women are typically less self-aware and less self-reflective than men are. So we all have our instincts, and most of us are operating off of those instincts. But the question of thirst is one that is somewhat disturbing, because there are men who are allegedly red pill, men who are aware of certain things, allegedly, and still proceed to praise women simply for their existence, more or less. And I think this is really the crux of the matter when we talk about thirst. It's that, sure, you have your normal people, Joe the plumber, they're going to succumb to it, or your normal Generation Z or millennial, they'll succumb to it, and all these things. And we all succumb to the clickbaity images of the hot anime chick with large jugosauri or what have you. Sure, that's all normal to be expected. But I think the issue at hand is that in the so-called manosphere, you still have a lot of thirst and a lot of unnecessary validation of females who have done nothing, who have contributed nothing, who simply appear on the scene. And boom, in the comment section, who are the men praising them? They're not the normie men, I can tell you that much. Why? Because normie men interact with normie women. It's the so-called red-pilled man, typically. The man who is woke, who's interacting with the female in question, who's praising the female in question, saying how great she is. If only more women were like you, traditional, submissive wives, etc., etc., and this sort of thing. And hey, fair enough. If that's your thing, that's your thing. But what I do think is on display here is a profound lack of self-awareness, because I think ultimately a lot of these men are working towards shooting themselves in the foot. Now, we all have to acknowledge, I think at this rate, that we're not going to change the state of the world as pertains to gynocentrism or the general state of affairs as pertains to the relations between the sexes. It just is the way it is. But I do think things can be exacerbated. I think things can be made worse. By succumbing to this thirst, this prolonged thirst, it doesn't improve things, it tends to make things worse. How and why? We know, for example, that if you're reasonably attractive and reasonably young, you can essentially appear on any venue as a female and get attention, money, fame, whatever you want. And there typically is a lot of complaint in the manosphere, or at least observation, you could say, that much of this tension is unwarranted by dint of the fact that the females in question are simply, well, breathing. They're just existing in front of a camera or what have you, and that's enough. And that shouldn't warrant attention. Now, that's a matter of opinion. If you share that view, then you share that view, and if you don't, you don't. But let's just say that's the argument, that they shouldn't be getting this attention because they're not doing anything to warrant it in that worldview. Then why would you, if that's the general consensus, I do think that's the general consensus of the manosphere, mind you, why would you lavish your attention on some ethot who happens to say a couple of things that might resonate with you? It doesn't really make sense. And I think this is the problem. Really, the matter at hand is that we have a lot of red pill men, and they're free to do this if they want. I just think it is a bit odd if they have so many complaints about women and the state of affairs in the world concerning the sexes, just saying, that they would feed into it. I think this is ultimately a question of whether or not they have self-awareness regarding this issue. I don't think they do. If they did, they would realize that playing into the many ethos that have been appearing willy-nilly for the past few months, and this has really been accelerating of late tremendously, is only going to make the overall situation worse. It's not as if more females need more attention because they're attention starved. There are plenty of them. Anyone heard of that Belle Delphine character? I don't know much about her, but I heard through rumor at least that she makes something like $300,000 a year. I don't know if that's an accurate summary of her funds, but it does seem like she makes quite a bit of money. And what does she do? Not a whole lot. Now, you might want to argue that there's some difference between a female getting up on a camera and speaking into it, offering her so-called wise words to the world, and some pure ethot who gets up in a short skirt or wears some kind of cute outfit or costume. And yeah, there is a difference. But what a lot of these men don't realize, and I think this is where they're being had, is that whether or not these women are being genuine, and it's very difficult to discern, maybe some of them are, maybe some of them are not, they're basically saying the things that you, as a red pill man suffering from enormous thirst, want to hear. They're saying the things, for example, about being a trad wife, about being a submissive, obedient wife, about playing into your fantasy, that desire of the thing that, frankly speaking, doesn't really exist in the real world any more than the thumbnail I use exists. I mean, there's no hot anime chick that looks like that in the real world. They just don't exist. And even if they did, almost none of us would have access to that chick. And so they're telling you what you want to hear, whether they're doing it deliberately through manipulation or that's actually what they think. And so you're buying into that. But that's not going to change your life. And more importantly, that is not going to change the nature of men and women. It's not going to change the state of affairs with regards to the sexes, the imbalances that exist and continue to exist. None of that will change through your thirst and your interaction and your praise of these women. In fact, quite to the contrary, you will amplify these imbalances. If it bothers you, as a red pill man say, that in the world women get all this attention lavished on, they don't have to do a whole lot, the fact that maybe you don't have access to certain scholarships that a woman might have access to, or the fact that you don't have access to certain facilities, social facilities and social resources. Any of those things bother you, I'm arguing that you're making it slightly worse by feeding into it. Now, I don't think we can change that state of affairs, meaning you can take a painting that was well painted and smash it on the ground in a matter of seconds and ruin everything. Perhaps there was a painting that took years to paint, getting all the details in, the color, the proportions, everything. That's something that very few people can do. So it's easier to make things worse than it is to fix them. I think that the prolonged thirst phenomenon is a phenomenon that just makes things worse. Now, personally, I don't really care if select men go and thirst after trad wives or females or whatever. I don't care. I'm really past that. I've been past that for a long time. I'm not even making this video for my benefit, that should be clear, but really for the benefit of men. I don't really have a tremendous interest in women. Reasons for that should be pretty obvious by now after all these years. They're just not that interesting. And so there are a number of factors that go into this. It's not as simple as just realizing something. But this is the point I want to drive home about the prolonged thirst. I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at a hot chick or looking at a nice anime image or what have you. That's fine. I do it too. But it's this validation that's sought after, which is ironically far more understandable in the normie blue pill guy who's dropping a cool 50 on some ethod on Twitch so he can be boyfriend of the hour. Those men are operating purely off of instinct, and you would think in the case of the manosphere men that they're not, but they are in fact. It's just that these instincts are much more deep-seated. They're much further back in the mind, in the body, in the soul, as it were. And all I have to say about that is, yes, if that's what you want to do, please, by all means, go ahead and do it. But if the state of the world, as it relates to men, and the many disadvantages that are in place regarding men, if that bothers you, then you're doing yourself and your fellow men no favor by caving into the thirst, offering undue praise to women who have done very, very little to warrant it, at least compared to some men out there. Certainly in terms of lacking originality, not saying anything new, not saying anything insightful. All they need to do is really repeat the platitudes they've heard from men's mouths, from their lips to men's ears, and boom, they have a bestseller. No, I don't think that's very helpful. But if you want to do it, that's fine. I'm just saying, inasmuch as things are very difficult to repair, if not impossible, there are always possibilities to make things worse. And the blatant and widespread thirst that permeates YouTube, Twitch, and the internet at large, succumbing oftentimes to what is obvious ethottery, is rather incredible, though it does not surprise me. Again, you want to do that as an individual man, that's fine. If it gives you something to feel good about, okay, we all need to do what we need to do to get through life. But I cannot relate to that at all as a red-pilled man who's middle-aged, who really has put women behind him and put them behind him a long, long time ago. And maybe it is just a matter of time. One thing I've tried to do throughout my time on YouTube and in life in general is to not create further imbalances in the world. So I'll go out of my way, it's become a reflex now because I've trained myself in real life to not treat women any differently from men and vice versa. If I hold the door for a woman, I hold the door for a man, and vice versa. If somebody's struggling to carry a package because they're just overloaded or they're disabled, I will help them regardless of their sex or gender. I actively strive for that. 20 years ago, I would have been more inclined to help the woman first, regardless of the situation. Well, things have changed. I've gotten older, I've learned a lot, and these are some of the things that I do in real life, in addition to the things I speak of on this channel, to not promote women over men. I certainly don't want to hurt women. I don't want to hurt anybody, but I'm not going to actively promote something that's unremarkable, fairly banal, and say it's amazing just because a woman happened to say it. Because more often than not, whatever they're saying, you've heard it 1,000 times before. It's just that the entity that said it happened to have a pair of testicles, and that didn't interest you as much. Anyway, try to cut the thirst down, gentlemen. It only makes things worse, and I will check you out later for another video. Bye-bye.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.